The all-new Toyota Sequoia, this Tundra-based three-row SUV, just got a major refresh. It's essentially a ground-up new truck, largely based on the current generation or new Tundra. Gone is the V8, and now in its place is a as-standard twin-turbo V6 hybrid drivetrain. In this video, we're going to be walking you through the technical differences between this and the Tundra, how it stacks up with the prior generation Sequoia. You'll be hearing from some of the engineers that actually designed this truck, and we'll be taking it for a drive both on the street and off-road. While this is a capstone trim level, we'll also be touching on the TRD models and all the various other trim levels. So with that, let's talk about the interior first. As I just mentioned, this is based on the Tundra, and this particular capstone model is essentially identical from the front seats forward to the Tundra we reviewed earlier this year. You get a leather dash, you get a premium JBL audio system, you get heated and cooled seats, a giant moonroof, and the identical control structure. So you get the giant infotainment screen running the latest version of Toyota Connected, which is fairly intuitive, but the screen is awfully big, so if you have short little stubby arms, you may find it difficult to reach the far side of the screen. Your HVAC controls are all physical, and they are nice and chunky, and your drive mode controls and your shifter and all that other stuff is fairly simplistic, intuitive physical controls, which is a good thing. Your steering wheel is rather large, there's a good range of adjustment, and you have a TFT gauge cluster, which means it's all digital. You also get a heads-up display as well. The rear seats in this truck, the second row specifically in this capstone trim level, are captain's chairs. There's a good range of adjustment there. And your third row is a bench seat, which also has a good range of physical adjustment. With the third row up, you get a little bit of cargo space, but with the third row down, it is enormous. The one thing I will say is the third row does not fold flat into the floor, so that may cause some awkwardness when it comes to storing some of your items. This vehicle offers good visibility, there's a lot of glass. When the moonroof is back, it basically feels like you're in a giant fishbowl. The one thing I will say is when it comes to seat comfort, this is by no means class leading. These seats on longer drives, it doesn't matter if it's in TRD guys, base guys, or this capstone, feel essentially mass transit. They are very hard, and on longer drives, at least in my experience, they're rather uncomfortable, and that general seat comfort also translates to the second and third row. The audio system in this car is reasonable. We've talked about the JBL audio system in the past, and in fact, we've tested it in the Tundra, and the overall NVH of this cabin is fairly low. There's not a lot of wind noise, and there's not a lot of tire noise, at least in the non-TRD variants. But with that, I think it's time for us to head into the shop, put this thing up on the lift. Mark, we're underneath the third generation of Toyota Sequoia. This is built on the global architecture Toyota has for trucks. So this is the same platform that the Land Cruiser, the Tundra, the LX are all on. This is TNGA-F, correct?
Sure. Sure, whatever it is.
Whatever Toyota acronym. This is an American-made product from Toyota. This is worked on by American engineers. The primary differences from the last vehicle that replaces the second-gen Sequoia is that it is essentially all new. It has a more rigid frame, it has coil rear suspension, it has a new front end entirely, it has different steering. It's just a far more sophisticated truck. The drivetrain is sort of the big story. We talk about it a lot. It is their twin-turbo V6. Unlike the Tundra, you can only get this one way. You can get this with a hybrid system.
It's supposed to improve efficiency, and as we have seen, it does by a couple miles per gallon. And on a bigger vehicle, that does add up, especially on longer trips. Again, it just depends on the type of person you are. Do you even care about it? Do you care about fuel efficiency at this point at $80,000 or $60,000 to $80,000? I don't know.
The 10-speed automatic in this is also, for a truck, quite good. Don't expect LC500.
Right, yeah, I mean, even though it's a derivative of that transmission, but obviously massively beefed up for this type of application. Now, we did have a chance to talk to the engineer about this, Jack.
Yeah, so let's cut over to him.
I'm Rob Crawford. I am one of the key project leads for the next generation Tundra and Sequoia. Is the Sequoia just, a Tundra with a third row? No, there's been a lot of focus on what is unique to an SUV versus what is unique to our Tundra. Both are body on frame, and so there are expectations for a body on frame truck in terms of its capability. The difference is relative to F1 platform trucks. The LX has the shorter wheelbase. Our wheelbase is extended slightly from the LX, and then of course Tundra is much longer. What ends up happening then is you have to look. We have a strategy of how to kind of develop these together. So our target logic and the approach we take to how we set up our feel for the steering or the ride comfort doesn't change so dramatically. We look at how we have to tune the individual components. So things like some of the spring rates and the absorber tunings are clearly different based on the wheelbase or based on the wheel tire combinations based on, again, more premium versus off-road. What I'm most proud of, and we can talk generally, Craig will speak to, is really the powertrain. Again, having been I've had 2 prior Sequoias, and the 5.7 liter V8 engine that's been in use has been a great powertrain. I've had no personal issue. I love the way that it pulls, has great power, but it is a incredibly night and day clear difference with this one motor hybrid.
So the powertrain itself is completely identical. The specs are the same. The V6 turbo, 3.5 liter, the 48 horsepower electric motor that's sandwiched between the engine and the 10-speed transmission. The gear ratios on the transmission and the rear differential are all the same. There are no differences. The electric battery is the same nickel metal battery, a 1.87 kilowatt hour battery. So the hardware itself is the same, and that allowed us to have a lot of commonality, and we didn't have to worry about any new durability requirements. All of the controls were identical, so that helped out in terms of efficiencies in development.
All right, so as a brief overview of what he said, the main thing is there are a ton of different trim levels and suspension packages, so you can get this in base, rear-wheel drive, you can get this in four-wheel drive, you can get this with a transfer case for off-roading with their multi-terrain select. There are a ton of different suspension packages. There are Bilsteins in sport. There are their off-road suspension. You can get Fox stampers and a skid plate for the TRD Pro variant. And in the Limited and this Capstone, you can also get air shocks in the rear, which turn these from passive dampers to active dampers. The one thing you are going to hear from us is these passive dampers on this Capstone don't ride all that well. We have not driven the car with the load leveling air ride shocks with the variable dampers, but I imagine that hopefully improves the ride quite a bit. Past that, the body treatments are pretty similar across all the lineups. You get some more aero paneling in the non-off-road variants, but with all that said, Mark, I think it's time for us to take this for a quick drive.
Let's check it out.
Mark, we were just in this about 7 months ago for our off-road segment of this video. Before we take a time machine backwards, let's talk about how this thing drives on the street. That's some V6 power right there. Joking aside, I know you have your problems with this vehicle, and I've been the asshole assigned to drive all these big boats on the channel because you don't want to drive them. I just got out of the Wagoneer. I spent time in the Suburban and the Tahoe and the Expedition and all these other piles. One thing this has going for it is, other than the GM 6.2 liter, this 6-cylinder is ultra smooth. Really is. It is a really refined, smooth drivetrain, a lot of torque, and the 10 speed's calibrated well. But past that, I think other elements from other brands do the 3-row SUV a little bit better.
I'm just gonna be honest here, dude. I think they're far behind the competition. I hate to say it. They were behind already with the Tundra and the Sequoia, and the only perks of those is you knew that you'd buy them and you'd have them for 17,000 years until the sun crashed into the earth. You know what I mean? Like that's why you bought them. So now it's like I expected more for the price, at least. We're dealing with the Capstone.
$80,000.
It's a lot of money. Obviously, you don't buy the Capstone, but for what you're getting here, really, for the money, every other brand's caught up. And with the variable of not knowing if this is going to be reliable, I would almost go to the competitors at this point?
I think let's assume that it is reliable for a minute, right? It is a Toyota product. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think the drivetrain is very competitive, particularly when you think that you get this drivetrain at much lower prices, right? There's only one drivetrain. It's this hybrid Turbo 6.
Yeah.
The front of this vehicle, again, no one buys three-row truck-based SUVs for handling. The front of the vehicle feels all right. The rear isn't super horrible or all over the place. I just think it isn't all that comfortable riding. In TRD trim, what we drove when we were in Texas during the launch program, out here, it's not that comfortable or that smooth. And the cargo in the back, with how it's set up, yeah, you can carry a lot of stuff, but the rear doesn't go flat. It's sort of this weird in-between product.
Yeah, so to expand on that, the biggest strike against it, and you kind of talked about it on the interior, is the layout in the back is not all that functional. There's all these dips and humps, so it's nowhere near as good as some of the unibody competition in terms of storage. It's not as good as the Suburban or the Escalade.
Or even the Wagoneer.
The Wagoneer is better laid out in the back for storage and cargo. Now, you could argue the human capacity, but the big deal breaker here for me, the biggest, is this ride quality is absolute horseshit. There is so much like medium to low frequency vibration off the shock absorbers and the springs. It feels like there's no dampers here most of the time. It just feels like it's doing this uncontrolled, and you get this low rumble and you feel it into your skull. Like, this is one of the few cars on, like, we're in the winter right now, of course, so the pavement is contracted, it's worse. But these moderate impacts and these small impacts just shake up your whole body and just shake you to death. And I every time I drive this, I get a headache. And it's just not good, man. I know it's body on frame, and you can't get rid of that.
But the Wagoneer's body on frame, the Suburban's body on frame.
The competition's nowhere near as bad as this, and you can make the towing argument. Once it's loaded up, it might smooth out. You ain't towing,
most of the
time when you're using it as a commuter vehicle. It's just not, something's not right about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it's just not good.
Yeah, I want to like this thing a lot, but purely objectively, on face value, when you're driving this and you're back-to-back with the Americans, not saying that I love the Suburban or the Wagoneer.
No, they're not like life-altering. I'm just taking a look at it from the fundamentals of what this does and what it doesn't do. You're right, drivetrain is pretty exceptional. I don't know, man. I'm kind of down on it for the price. Final thoughts on the Sequoia, and thank you to Toyota for allowing us to take this on and off-road. We drove the TRD, the regular version, on and off-road. We saw it tow, and we had access to the engineers to figure out what the hell they were trying to accomplish. And here's the takeaway. They're taking an architecture and it has to scale out. It has to be a Toyota Tundra pickup truck, and it has to be a $120,000 Lexus product. And then the Sequoia falls somewhere in between. But the main thing we kept hearing is premium, upscale, right? They want it to be a luxury-like experience for somebody that needs to tow, haul, go off-road, plow a ton of people in here, and it needs to be accessible. And here's the thing. If this was 10 years ago, I'd say, well, the Sequoia is amazing. But every other brand has figured out ride refinement, it's figured out luxury features for less money, and you look at economy cars, mid-sized cars, small SUVs, large SUVs, body-on-frame vehicles, they've all gotten better in this regard. And the Sequoia, at least in ride quality, feels like it's 10 years behind. There's no reason for this to ride as rough as it does at its price point. The Ram pickup truck, the Escalade, the Lincoln products, basically everybody else, namely with Air Ride, does way better than this, and that's the biggest negative. The other problem is the seats feel very, very hard in the front. The layout in the back is going to be a mixed bag depending on who you are. Because of the nothing folds flat in the back, there's going to be some awkwardness, but they've sacrificed the flatness for the fact that you can move the seats around to get in easier. I mean, again, it depends on who you are and what your usage case is. If you're towing, hauling, you're going to love this thing. You're going to like the drivetrain. They did a really good job with it, and its ease of repairability in terms of the hybrid system, it should be bulletproof in that regard. Engine is a different case. We've seen many things where it's going to be harder to service than the old V8. I mean, this is typical internal combustion stuff in this era. Everything's more complicated in that regard. Overall, there's this strong sense of it feels like a Toyota, and that's a blessing and a curse. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.